largest standalone pharma air freight facility in the US. So it's taken time, it takes investment, but actually the growth is clearly there, not only on the inbound side from predominantly India, but also on the export side. Chicago for us has grown 30% year on year over the last 3 years. And that's just demand for those specific types of products, but also around the world as well. If you take some of the biggest challenging ones, for example, like Egypt. So if you go back 2 years ago, the ground handling infrastructure in Egypt was really, really poor. And there was huge challenges from customers to get their product there, how it should be. However, a new ground handler set up shop, opened up, and they have also opened up, especially in Africa, one of the largest dedicated pharma facilities. And what's really interesting, I think, for a lot of these ground handlers is, as soon as they've made that investment, especially us as an airline, we jumped on board straight away, and we also saw our business increase exponentially into Egypt. And so when ground handlers start to see that, I think they actually realize what good it is. It's not, I was talking to some others in the US recently, and they're like, it'd be great to get you on board. And I said, no, I don't think you quite understand. If you build a dedicated standalone pharma facility in this specific area, it won't be just us that will be banging down on your door. It'll be all carriers, because pharma is becoming so important. But then, of course, it's not just looking at the actual ground handlers. It's actually what capability do you have on the ramps, for example, at origin destination. So there are a number, including Egypt, and if you look at Brussels and Frankfurt, Madrid, and predominantly in Dubai, I mean, we have a large fleet of cool dollies. However, cool dollies is technology that we started 6-8 years ago, and there are some now still implementing that, but we're looking forward to what's coming next. So we're actually going to be developing some air freight, highly insulated air freight container using phase change material. And that will protect the product at origin and destination and throughout the hub in Dubai, which will then also lessen our need for the cool dollies as well. Because the big challenge is origin and destination, specifically in those countries where there's limited capability.
Thanks. I'll come back to you in a minute. Makran, is one of the things that I just read earlier was the regulation that to ensure that the ease of doing business takes a next step. The Central Truck Controller has waived off the provisions of no objection certificates, as you are aware, for most of the countries, right? You may recollect our discussion earlier, and now being, other than the Europe and US countries, yet we are facing these issues from European countries, the EU transshipment. How has that been how has that been addressed by you as an exim through your bodies? Because the drug controllers has finally accepted and agreed, and that's how they've extended the NOC, but you are still facing these issues of European export guidelines where they don't allow Indian products either to be transshipped, or there are still those legacy problems of packaging.
Hello, check. Okay, before answering Bharat's question, because let me just also give you a feedback or my opinion about, as a shipper, what we look for. First is customer service. Okay, and we look at compliance, we look at costs. Okay, so if you look at it very broadly, we have these three aspects. Now, in terms of customer service, you can have a percentage, 95%, 97%, 98%. In terms of cost, you can have cost reduction by whatever, 1%, 5%, 10%. But when it comes to compliance, there's no percentage. So it has to be 100% compliance. And compliance for the shipper can be across everything. One is for a pharma company, say the FDA. So certain FDA regulations and rules may not be identical, say in the US or South America or Europe or India. Okay, so for example, if you have a manufacturing center in India and exporting to the US, we need to comply with both the US FDA as well as with the Indian FDA. So if there's a sampling techniques which are different, you got to comply with the most stringent of the two. If there are, so it's not that because you are supplying to the US, you follow only US. So we need to comply with both. Second aspect would be in terms of customs rules and controlled substances. There are some products which are controlled substances classified as controlled substance in US and not classified in India. So in India, you don't need a license from the narcotics control or CBN, but in the US, you need a license from the DEA. So it can be quite complex in some cases where it's different. And thirdly, if the raw material comes from Europe, in that case, Europe may or may not be classified as a controlled substance. So we need to ensure the entire supply chain, whether it's raw material or finished product, depending from origin and destination, complies as per the shipping route between origin and destination. So this is quite complex, but compliance is compliance. I mean, there's no way out of compliance. Thirdly, when you look at many of the airports are getting these approvals of CIV or GDP, and companies too. So I would always, in a lighter vein, like to compare it to us getting a driving license. So getting a certification is like getting a driving license, but how you drive and what is also important. So certification is one part, but compliance becomes how you execute. So while we may all be certified, say, by driving license, how we drive also matters. So it's a continuous improvement over the day-to-day operations that matters. Now to come back to Bharat's question regarding regulations, yes, in the past there were some issues about moving product between India and South America via Europe, where the product was not complying to European regulations. And the products were stopped at some of the European airports. However, I think that has been now discussed globally. And if it's transiting, if it is not using controlled substances or banned items globally, I think for pharma products, now the European community is permitting the product to move as long as it is not getting out of the airport. So if it's in transit, I think several pharma products now are permitted to move, because the other option was, and I'm sure Julian would be happy, to change from European carriers to Middle Eastern carriers. So, I mean, end of the day, it's business. And I think the European community realized that if the product is not entering the European Union and just passing through, then I don't think it's a contravention of any regulation inside the European Union. Okay, apart from controlled substances and narcotics.
Thanks, Ryan. Sane, if you want to add to that, because I have two more questions for you and Ryan again.
No problem. Now, basically, the question you asked was about the CDSCO, and we, all pharmaceutical exports requiring the ADC clearance in India. That was one of the speed breakers which you referred to. And it has been a great help that speed breaker, initially it was only for 5 countries, and now it has been removed for everything. It has to some extent been replaced by track and trace and barcoding, in that it is more of regulatory and keeping of record of the parent-child relationship, etc. So even over there are exceptions. Like in countries where they already have a track and trace regulation, we can get an exemption in India from having the Indian track and trace, following the Indian track and trace regulations. Where it is not, we still have to follow the Indian ones. So that one responsibility has come in. And as Ryan said, the transit through Europe is not a problem anymore, at least now, until I mean, it has not been completely shut out. Anytime any of those countries, the customs could start this again. But at the moment, and we also have certain responsibility in the sense that if you know that a product is of under patent through Europe, route it via the Middle East, route it from somewhere else. It is not necessary that you have to take that risk. At least, especially for launch products, etc., we take this precaution always.
Thanks, Sani. There another question for Ryan and you. You have to explain to us what are the unique advantages that the air cargo offers vis-a-vis the other mode of transport. Now, I'm talking to you two gentlemen based on the international exports that you
Sure.
have been heading. But as you know, being in India, we have so much domestic, we have so much temperature control movement. And in 2015, United Nations had made a unique 999-hour study where they monitored shipments moving from northeast as far as Arunachal Pradesh and other cities, where 50% or more drugs, by the time they reach the retailers, they lost their potency.
Right.
So in the entire gambit of the pharma, I just want you gentlemen to give a thought on that. And what do you expect the air carrier and the forwarders more than what we have been jointly doing? Your thoughts, because it is very important for us to understand from yourself, not only when I come to you as a salesman, but you know, for all of us to understand.
Right.
So then I go to Julian and Savannah thereafter.
Okay. Okay. Now, the main thing as far as the first question of yours was regarding the domestic part of it, though I am not a domestic distribution man, but basically the last mile delivery of temperature control shipments has been a concern in all pharmaceutical companies in India. Where the use of air freight comes, again, air freight is used only for launch or urgent or highly temperature sensitive shipments. Third thing is that the infrastructure, the road infrastructure, as well as the availability of cold vans and transportation has exponentially improved in India. So while bringing the shipment from Guwahati to, say, Mumbai, I would not be that much worried as I would have been another 5 years ago. Okay? The availability of roads, the availability of good transportation, refrigerated transportation. So that makes all the difference. And as far as our expectations from the forwarders or from airlines are concerned, the main thing as far as my forwarder goes, I would say that it has to be a partnership. Okay? It cannot be that they are just my vendor and I have to get some work out of them. If that is the attitude, then it never works. The second thing is that as far as the airlines are concerned, one thing I have to appreciate, especially with Emirates also, is that they are now getting into the last mile delivery for international export also. Though it is still under discussion, it is not finalized, all that, okay? But there are certain airlines which have started doing that. They are delivering to my warehouse or my client in Europe. At least in Europe it has started, maybe because of better availability of transportation, etc. But in Europe, this is something that is very exciting, that the airline is taking the responsibility of delivering to the final customer, which was just not possible a few years ago. They did not even consider it. So that's a good thing. But the only problem that we face as far as temperature control, because all my shipments now to Europe, USA, and most of the countries are temperature controlled. And the problem always happens either at the transit station or at the destination. And that is a concern that we face, that if I am asked by my management, how confident are you? I always have to say that I am confident until the shipment is in my hands over here. So that is something that needs to improve, especially at the transit stations handling of cargo, of temperature sensitive cargo.
What are your concerns? Where you think we as stakeholders lack? Now, when I'm talking about we, I talk about the person who picks up the cargo from your facility and gives us at the air cargo complex, me as a forwarder who in partnership with the custodian unloading and the ground handling agent till the time it is on board.
Yeah.
And then your concern still continues after the arrival of the cargo
Yes, it does.
until your trucker or an airline arranges last mile delivery.
Well, very frankly, over the years, the concern as far as India is concerned, until the shipment is loaded or say deposited in the CSC, has reduced to a large extent, because we still feel that we have certain controls over here which we can exercise along with our freight forwarder. It's only after that it goes out of our control that we are not sure what is going to happen. Now, for countries like the USA, for example, which is a very surprising thing, the complete lack of cold chain infrastructure over there at the airports. Almost 90%, more than 90% of the airports don't have any facility for 15 to 25 also. Forget about 2 to 8 degrees. In fact, some of them purposely have facilities for 2 to 8, but not for 15 to 25. That's crazy.
Yeah.
So that is something which is causing us a lot of trouble, because that makes that last mile very, very critical for us. The only option we have left is to pre-clear the shipment as much as possible. Yeah. Hope that the FDA releases it immediately and take it to our warehouse as fast as possible.
Thank you. Yeah, please.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. To just take it forward from what Mr. Sani said, I'd like to represent or speak on behalf of our customers who are esteemed pharmaceutical companies. And during our interaction with them, one of the feedback or one of the areas that as forwarders we'd like to put forth to the industry as well is that whilst we're seeing the infrastructure at Mumbai or other gateway airports improving, the pharma business is typically such that you see a lot of cargo that comes in towards the month end or the quarter end. And there are huge challenges at the infrastructure to gate in cargo, especially on the air side. And the dwell time of the trucks that keep waiting is pretty high. So perhaps I would like to leave this as a thought to some of our custodian colleagues who are here in the forum, or take the message back to the council and the trade, is that maybe today, typically for the gateway airports, whether it's Mumbai, Delhi, or Bangalore, and the rest of it, the infrastructure came in after the carriers and the freighter operations grew. So we were always behind the time and we kept adding to the congestion. But as we progress, there are tier 2 airports coming up, and I'm sure with the congestion, we will start to see more freighter carriers moving in that direction to those airports. And having learned a lesson from our gateway situation, it would be nice if we start to look at cool chain facilities at gateway airports where we see pharma manufacturers being located, whether it's part of the Gujarat belt, whether it's part of the northern belt. And perhaps the time is right to see if we can start to see cold chain warehouses or clearance facilities at ICDs, so that the dwell time, especially towards the second fortnight of the month, is reduced, because it also has commercial impact, adding to the cost of shipments with trucks waiting. So that's perhaps just that I would like to add.
Sabana, since you are there, I'd like to ask you as a forwarder, from a forwarder, what are the steps we forwarders have taken in the last few years to take a better position as leaders in the shipping industry? As you know, we have about 20 of us here today, and being a global commodity is also India's biggest commodity for air freight. What are the steps forwarders should be taking? I'm not saying what you or our companies have taken, but what we should take. We are today in the neutral zone here.
From my perspective of what I see, I think a lot of work has been done on the forwarding side, whether it's multinational companies, whether it's Indian forwarders, big forwarders, small. I think the pharmaceutical industry has been a growing attraction for forwarding segment, because it still is a very attractive vertical to work on, and therefore every forwarder in his own domain is trying to enhance the deliverables to meet this industry requirement. Typically, if I were to see, or what I would perhaps represent here is that customer service, as Ryan mentioned, is very critical to the need of business. So yes, customer service, a team which understands the business, and it's not just about tracking